Welcome to part 2 of Biodiversity 3.02. Now to the slides. So as you can see here, there's a lot going on in terms of the speciation that you see amongst these various types of fish. They all had a common single ancestor, and what you might note is how long this passage of time is. It's in millions of years, not just tens or thousands of years. Now, when we look at what's going on here, we can see that these fish are in isolated lakes. So once there was probably one large lake, and then they were further separated by geography, maybe tectonic action. That is the Rift Valley area, if I remember correctly. And these fish have adapted to local conditions and specific local habitats and predators. And what you can see here is from this one common ancestor, we get many. So they originally started as one population and then became isolated. In the next instance, we have one population that goes to an island. So one population from the mainland here of this bird that you can see here, the finch, flies over in a population, probably quite small, maybe gets blown there by a storm, and settles in the Galapagos Islands. And if you look here in the Galapagos Islands, you've got many different islands, so you can have isolation of these individual populations. In addition, there's brand new habitats and niches that are available for the birds to exploit. So from this one common ancestor, population, you're going to get different beak types depending on what they eat, whether it's insects or whether it's going for ground grains. And we're going to see something called, I'll do the next slide. And we get the speciation here, and this is adaptive radiation. So again, they're showing you all the different types of niches that this one original population evolved into dealing with. And so they can no longer breed. They're all unique species. But you can start to see, here's the insect-eating birds. Over here, we see the vegetarian. Here we get a bird that eats a cactus. And so there's just different selection pressures, and that's going to change what their beaks look like. Their coloration may change due to a variety of reasons as well, maybe habitat and hiding, or maybe it's for attracting mate. And the finches on the islands, called Darwin's finches, are the most famous. As a side note, he actually didn't note this occurring. He noticed the different species in the Galapagos Islands, but he's not the first one to have documented and to really unpack everything that we see here at Darwin's finches. Now, this is a good time to stop the video to watch the video about Darwin's finches on the topic page for 4.02. Now, if you've had a chance to watch the video, you'll have seen this in action. And another way that you can have speciation occur is due to isolation of populations, which can be caused by environmental changes forming barriers, such as a mountain formation, changes in rivers dividing populations, sea level change, climatic change, or plate movements. And that plate movement isolation is likely what may have happened with the fish that we saw in this example here, where there was maybe one lake originally, or they started in one lake and then moved to areas, but then they get isolated in these three different lakes. Here we can see two populations of fish, and what happened was they could be, the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea were one habitat until about 3.5 million years ago, when the Isthmus of Panama rose up and isolated the populations. So you can still see ancestrally they share some characteristics with the phenotype. Behaviorally, I don't know if it changes a lot, but we can really see some distinct changes in other aspects of the phenotype for their specific niches now on either side. And after the Isthmus isolated these populations, they gradually adapted to different selection pressures between the Caribbean and Pacific marine environments and became different species. This process is called speciation. So the one with the finches gives you many more populations. This gives you two new populations. Now let's look a little below on the next slide, and what we see here is that the Earth's crust is constantly changing in terms of the plates moving. You can see how Africa, South America, India, Antarctica, and Australia were all once one plate, kind of like ice caps floating in the ocean, and they gradually pull apart, or they'll slide across each other. And what we can see is, by looking at this picture, we can actually see when plates divided or when certain organisms arose. For example, this green, the fossils of this fern are found on all the continents because it had distribution across them when that was Pangea. By the time just Africa and South America were connected, we can see the fossil remains of this land reptile is found on both, In the same way, there are rocks here and here that match each other in type and age, and this is where the plate boundary is, where you see the blue. But originally they would have been able to move between. And so this also shows how we get isolation. Now, when these continents move, it'll also change their climates. So Antarctica here, if you notice, is much further north than it is now. It's much further south, and it's a polar climate. And so the plates moving will change the climates and present new habitats for new species. Now to dig in a little further, we can see there's physical barriers that arise, and that'll isolate populations of different species, allowing for new species to arrive. Or in the case of Australia, species that have arisen and no longer have a competitive advantage will not be selected out like the marsupials. We just have the possums left in North America. But in Australia, you have lots of marsupials, and the isolation of Australia allowed them to keep that population, whereas in North America, we lose them. Now, if you can have the isolating of populations, we can also have the land bridges that will occur. And that will be a land bridge between North and South America when the Isthmus of Panama emerged, as we saw in an earlier slide. This slide right here, this isthmus, and that'll allow organisms to enter multiple new habitats, or even allow them to enter a habitat which they had once left, or to colonize new ones. So horses that evolved in North America, but would subsequently go extinct in North America, moved over the land bridge, in a sense in the opposite direction to humans coming to North America tens of thousands of years ago, and populated across Asia. Now, we can also see this process occurring on a much, much smaller scale, and quicker in some senses, where we can have islands. And we can have the fact that some species on islands can be unique. There can be unique adaptations, such as the pygmy hippopotamus. If it's smaller, it needs less resources. On the other hand, you can get two populations of rattlesnakes, and either due to the bottleneck effect or just local changes, we'll see different colorations of those snakes. And the one you can see here is the Santa Catalina Island in California. And the final one is the tree-climbing kangaroo of New Guinea, where there was a niche that was available for it, and so it moves from being a ground dweller to a tree dweller. And so, to sum up, islands can have the same effect with the evolution of new species in isolation, or providing new habitats and, of course, niches for an original colonizing species. Now, when we look at the distribution of the continents, that's also caused climatic variations and variations in food supply, which both contribute to evolution because those are both selection pressures. That's right, selection pressures. Now, if you asked about the mass extinctions, let's take a look at why these mass extinctions have occurred. It could be due to tectonic plate movements. That's those plates moving apart, moving this way. We can have massive volcanic eruptions. We can also have climatic changes, which include drought and ice ages. And then finally, meteorite impact can also change climate. And these all have resulted in new directions in evolution and therefore increased biodiversity, though for a short while there was less biodiversity. So let's take a look over here. We can see in this first one, this death rate, we have 85% death rate, time 445 million years ago, likely causes rapid global cooling and falling sea levels as the ice collects on the continents. We're going to see coastal areas destroyed, and we're also going to see chemical reactions that occur, which will further affect the climate. In the Devonian, 340 million years ago, likely asteroid impact or impacts, rapid global cooling, maybe due to the dust that's been thrown up into the atmosphere, and what we get is local destruction from debris, but also ocean life affected by the temperature changes. In the Permian, we can see that the likely causes were volcanic activity. There's an increase in methane and CO2, which is going to cause rapid global warming, and the results are that oxygen will be removed from oceans, which is a problem. In addition, there'll be desertification of the land, and that caused massive death rates there. In the Triassic, we see that that's 200 million years ago. We see the likely causes were methane and CO2 again. They're not sure of the mechanism. It might have been upwelling from deep ocean. And we get a rapid global warming, desertification of land, and frequent heat waves. And then finally, the KT boundary, that's one that allowed mammals to have a chance again after we'd been outcompeted by reptiles, likely causes an asteroid impact, volcanic activity, falling sea levels, but there had already been changes due to tectonic changes, and what some of the theories attribute the asteroid impact to is just by sort of pushing the dinosaurs over a boundary that they'd already been on due to climate change. And we see widespread fires, plants disrupted by a global ash cloud, which again causes problems in food chains, especially at the higher levels, of the higher trophic levels. And then it's similar to what we might find in nuclear winter that you may have read about. So to summarize, you're going to have to be able to explain how plate activity has influenced both evolution and biodiversity. Remember, land masses move across climate zones, which can increase biodiversity by providing new niches and maybe moving into warmer climate areas, which promote biodiversity. You may see migration routes that open or close. If they close, then we're going to get isolation and new species arising due to isolation. If they open, then species can travel to new areas and through adaptive radiation can fill a lot more niches. And then finally, there's geographic isolation. We can also see the causes of mass extinction, which might be plate tectonics. It might be volcanic activity, which of course comes from plate tectonics, and then finally asteroid impacts. But remember, when you say asteroid impact, then you talk about the ash cloud disrupting the plants. In the terms of in relation to climate change, that would be due to continents moving, or due to the volcanic activity, which is going to send up CO2 and methane into the atmosphere. So don't just say the original event, then say the consequence, and then after the global warming, you then say, the global temperature rise, you would then have desertification, and in other cases, the lack of oxygen in the oceans. Again, we see this plate again, and you can clip back and forth, and you can see that these are infrequent, and there's a variety of causes. Finally, in terms of international mindedness, within the human population, their distinct characteristics have evolved with different populations due to isolation, though natural selection exposure to the environment conditions that were unique to the regions of these populations. And you might consider how globalization has altered some of the environmental factors, which were formerly unique, so you get populations moving. In addition, selection pressures aren't as strong just simply because humans have an ability to change their niche without having to evolve by behavioral adaptations, like clothes and cold weather. Finally, in addition to international mindedness with human characteristics, we could also see the human impact has caused an increase in the rate of mass extinctions, and some people would say that when you look at the mass extinctions, that we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that in our current age, we may be in the midst of a 6th mass extinction due to human activity and how we've been using the biosphere.